Hello again, I'm Matthew Gore from lightandmatter.org, and I'm back this time with my comparison of the truly magnificent Sigma 14-24 f2.8 Art Series lens for Sony E-mount and the Tamron 17-28 f2.8 Di3 RXD lens, also a really excellent lens for Sony. Obviously, the Tamron has a less ambitious zoom range, but it's also much smaller and lighter, at just over half the weight of the Sigma lens. The Tamron weighs in at 418 grams, just 0.92 pounds, while the Sigma tips the scale at 795 grams. So the Tamron is 53% of its weight. All of Tamron's E-mount lenses have 67mm filter threads, and this one's no different, while the Sigma does not have front filter threads at all. But it does have a filter holder on the lens mount side. It also has an auto focus lock button and a manual focus switch, while the Tamron doesn't have any buttons or switches at all. But both lenses have dust and weather sealing, though I didn't test it. And if you were curious about the combined weight of these lenses along with the 24-70 and 28-75 respectively, the two Tamrons total 968 grams, not a whole lot more than the 14-24's 795, while the two Sigma lenses together weigh 1,630 grams. The fact that I'm spending so much time thinking about lens weight makes me realize how old I'm getting. Before I get into the details of these lenses, I have a giveaway to announce. This time, I'll be giving away a Moment rugged camera sling, your choice of either the 6-liter or the 10-liter model. Moment didn't sponsor this video, but they did send us a couple of these bags to review, which I haven't done yet. So for now, if you want any details about them, I've posted a couple of links in the description below to the Moment site, and using those links will of course help support the channel. Any subscriber on this channel can win the sling bag of your choice. All you have to do is leave a comment below telling me whether you'd prefer the 6-liter or the 10-liter model, and of course anything relevant about the video would be appreciated too. And while you're at it, why not give the video a thumbs up? It's not required to win, but it's always appreciated. A winner will be chosen at random and announced in my next lens review video. Full details are in the video description. Now back to the lenses. The most obvious difference between these lenses is the difference in zoom range. So let's start out by taking a quick look at how different they really are. This is the angle of view of the Tamron lens at 28mm. And here's the 24mm end of the Sigma for comparison. It's not a huge difference, but the Tamron does get significantly tighter. Now here's the Tamron's 17mm end, which is quite a bit wider than the 24mm of course. And then the Sigma at 14mm, which again is a lot wider than the Tamron's 17. Incidentally, I shot these images from a concrete platform on Pier 58 on the Seattle waterfront, which is right between the Great Wheel and the Seattle Aquarium, which in September unceremoniously collapsed into the water, taking a couple of construction workers with it. So I guess I dodged a bit of a bullet there. Anyway, ultra-wide lenses generally have some extra distortion to deal with, so let me quickly show you what you'll get with these two. Here's the Tamron at the 17mm end before lens corrections are applied in Camera Raw, and here it is corrected so that you can see the difference. With no correction, there's a significant amount of barrel distortion, and it's mostly fixed when the corrections are applied. Capture One or another RAW processor might do a better job. At the opposite end, there's less distortion, but when corrections are applied, it's easy to see that it's pincushion distortion here, and the corrections do a good job. Now with the Sigma at the 14mm end, the distortion is remarkably well controlled before it's corrected, and with the corrections on, the straight lines of the buildings look good to me. At the 24mm end, the Sigma is like the Tamron. There's a little bit of pincushion distortion to deal with, but Adobe does a good job correcting it. Most Sony cameras will be able to apply these types of corrections in camera, if you're shooting JPEGs or video, or if you're shooting RAW, you can use the lens profiles in Lightroom or other RAW processing software. Now, let's take a look at the resolution of these lenses. I took these test shots using my standard testing procedure with my Sony a7R III, so keep in mind that some of these differences might not be visible if you're using lower resolution sensors. Speaking of which, this video is produced at 4K, so if you're not watching this section full screen on a 4K monitor, you probably won't see any difference. If you don't want to just take my word for it, I'll post 100% crops in some smaller sizes in the full review on my site, lightandmatter.org, that everyone should be able to compare. There's a link below. Anyway, let's start at the 17mm end of these zooms. Here in the center, both lenses look good, but if you take a look at the trees against the gray wall, you can see that the Sigma is a little bit sharper. It's pretty visible in the text on the signs, too. At f4, they're both sharper and there's less difference between them, but the Sigma is still a little bit sharper than the Tamron here. Stopping down to f5.6, nothing really changes. The Sigma is still marginally sharper, but at f8, I would say the Tamron catches up and they look identical beyond f8. Moving away from the center of the lens, at f2.8 the Sigma still looks like it might have slightly better resolution here, but it's a pretty modest difference. Beyond f2.8, we see the same pattern as in the center. They get closer at f4 and 5.6, and at f8, the Tamron is pretty close. Here though, I think the Sigma is still resolving a little bit better fine detail. Out in the corner of the images, we get the same story, except that the difference at f2.8 is a little stronger in favor of the Sigma. You can see some general softness in the people in this billboard on the Tamron, although the fine details on the tops of these buildings are still remarkably good in absolute terms. The Sigma just happens to be a little bit sharper. Again, things improve on both sides at f4, and the Tamron catches up a little more at f5.6. And by f8, the Tamron is just about caught up with the Sigma, though the Sigma still has better contrast out here. So let's take a look at the other end of the zoom range. Here at 24mm, in the center of the frame, the two look identical for all practical purposes. Looking at the raw files, I'd say that the Tamron actually looks a little bit better here, but it's such a small amount that it's not even visible in the rendered video. The same thing is true at f4. They look almost identical. At f5.6, they still look identical for all practical purposes, but if I had to pick one, I'd lean towards the Sigma being a hair sharper, but this might just be a difference in light between the two shots. And again, at f8, they look the same. Further away from the center, nothing really changes at f2.8. They both look nice and sharp, and virtually identical. They both improve slightly at f4, but remain pretty similar to each other, and at f5.6, I'd say that the Sigma gets a nice boost in contrast again, but the resolution looks about the same, and at f8, they're pretty identical. Finally, out at the edge of the frame, the Sigma looks a bit sharper than the Tamron at f2.8, especially if you compare the fine branches and twigs on this little balcony tree, or really any of the fine lines in this part of the image. Stopped down to f4, the Tamron catches up most of the way, but the Sigma is still maybe a little sharper. And the same thing is true from f4 to f8. They're very similar, but the Sigma is maybe a little sharper or more contrasty. And at f8, the difference is really pretty negligible. I bought this Tamron lens last winter, And then the Sigma arrived in February, just before the pandemic broke out here in the Seattle area, and I managed to get a little bit of general shooting in. The week that the Sigma arrived in the mail, the first and only political rally of the year was announced for the Tacoma Dome, back when Bernie Sanders was the frontrunner for the Democratic nomination. So I got my press pass and threw the 2 ultra-wide lenses into my bag and headed out. And the 2 ultra-wides were almost completely useless for me. Some photojournalists are great at using ultra-wide angle lenses for event coverage, but I'm not one of them. I did take some crowd shots with both lenses, and they did show the cavernous size of the arena, but I wouldn't say any of the shots that I took with them were any good. I had better luck with my usual telephotos. One of the big advantages of using an ultra-wide angle lens is that you can take some small element in a photo, like the dandelions here, and get really up close to them so that they dominate the frame and you emphasize their importance, while still maintaining the wider setting and sense of place, in this case the basketball court and surrounding buildings. I tried to keep that principle in mind as I strolled around the city last spring. I made my noodle bowl huge, and shot random other things with various degrees of success. I went out to the coast and tried some shots there too. These long exposures all required one of my screw-on neutral density filters, so I only shot them with the Tamron. I didn't have any rear mount filters for the Sigma at that point. Wide-angle lenses are also useful for creating a strong diminishing perspective in images and interesting visual pathways through an image. So I shot a few of those too. These are standard shots from the south side of the city with the Tamron and also the Sigma. They both did well, and autofocus was never a problem with either lens, even in low light. Eventually, I took a drive out to eastern Washington with the idea of shooting the night sky, which is rarely visible through the clouds in the Seattle area. Unfortunately, I had been waiting for a day that was supposed to have a clear sky, and with my attention on the weather, I forgot to check on the phase of the moon. As I sat in my car waiting for the sky to darken up, the full moon rose above the horizon in front of me. I hopped out of my car and I took the shot that I had set up with the Sigma, and then about 5 minutes later, I shot it with the Tamron. But I made a mistake, and the Tamron was shot at 20 seconds long instead of 10, like the Sigma. Anyway, here are the stars at 200% zoom with the Tamron, and you can see their movement. And here they are with the Sigma. I don't see any obvious coma in either one, but I doubt that I would with how bright the sky was, and my focus was on the house rather than the stars, so this test is inconclusive. Now, before wrapping up this video, there's one final issue to be discussed, and that is lens flare. Now, any lens is going to produce some flare in certain circumstances, like when you're shooting into a bright light. Like this shot here, I'm shooting directly into the sun. Here, I've got a little bit of flare down at the bottom of the frame in the center, but that's not much. The Sigma actually handles flare pretty well in shots like this. And here again, the sun is just outside of the top of the frame, and there's really pretty minimal flare here on the right side of the frame. Some light spots down here, and some streaky areas up here at the top of the frame. But this lens has a bulbous, protruding front element. It would look something like this if the hood were removed. And because the element sticks out so far, Light that's coming in from the side of the lens will hit it at a direct enough angle that it will enter the lens and create flare, rather than being reflected off, as it usually would be on a flatter front element. The result is a situation like this one. If you look at the shadows on these yellow cones, you see that the light is coming in straight from the left side of the frame, and down at about a 45-degree angle. This shouldn't be a problematic situation at all, but as you can see here, there's a big crescent of rainbow-colored flare. Similarly, I took this shot standing in an alleyway. In fact, this alleyway, facing the building on the right. So again, the sun was coming from the side and well overhead, so I didn't expect it to be a problem. But this is that shot, and I obviously got some serious flare here all around the frame. So this is something you really need to be aware of when you're shooting with a lens that has this type of front element. Incidentally, this is a memorial for Donnie Chin, a local hero in Seattle's Chinatown, which we call the International District. If you're interested in learning more about the mystery surrounding his death, I've left a link below. So where does that leave us? The Sigma lens clearly has the more ambitious and more attractive zoom range, and while both lenses have some distortion, the Sigma's is a little bit better controlled in the lens and in post. I like the fact that the Sigma has a manual focus switch and an autofocus lock button, and probably most importantly, the Sigma has outstanding resolution. But the Tamron also has excellent resolution, with only the beginnings of softness near the corners, and it's a more user-friendly lens. With a much lighter weight and a smaller size to carry around, it has standard screw-on filter threads, and it has no special problems with lens flare. And when it comes to cost, the Sigma is $1,400, while the Tamron is only about $850. That's a price difference of $550, which is nothing to sneeze at, though you really shouldn't be sneezing at anything with this pandemic about. Both of these lenses are excellent, but if you need a 14mm lens, there is no substituting a narrower lens. The Sigma is well built, wonderfully sharp, and doesn't have terrible distortion. It also feels good in the hand, like a professional tool. If you need the highest resolution possible in your zoom lens, and a 14mm angle of view, get the Sigma. It's a great lens. When I was shooting with these lenses, I found that I rarely wanted to go any wider than about 20mm. That might change if I used the 14mm lens for a longer time, but for the moment, I actually find that the 17 to 28mm meets my requirements, and it's lightweight and sharp too. I think most travel photographers and hikers will prefer the Tamron's size and filter compatibility. In the end though, you should get the one that fits your photography and your lifestyle. They're both excellent lenses. My next video is going to look at the new Tamron 70 to 300mm zoom, also for Sony E-mount. And if you'd like to see that, and see who wins the Moment sling bag that I mentioned earlier, just subscribe to the channel and click that bell icon. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. It's a huge help to small channels like this one. And that's it. Stay safe out there, everyone.